Um, Welcome, everybody. My name's Bob Lee. I'm the president of the China Society of Southern California. This program is co-sponsored by the China Society, Chinese Historical Society of Southern California, and the Textile Museum Associates. The program is being recorded. As most of you know, this is the fifth program in a series of programs. And I just want to emphasize that because the programs are being recorded, if you didn't see the previous programs, or if you want to go back to the previous programs or see this program again, you can do so by going to YouTube and looking at the site for China Society. I think those of you who have seen the programs probably don't need an introduction to David, but maybe this is new to some of you. So let me tell you that David Hugus is an avid collector of Chinese rank badges. He's been collecting for probably almost 30 years. And not only has he been collecting, but he has also been doing research. And he has written 2 books on the rank badges. The latest one is called Chinese Rank Badges, Symbols of Power, Wealth, and Intellect in the Ming and Qing Dynasties. I think it's a great book, but I haven't read the whole book, but I've read the portions that are applicable to what David's been talking about. And I find that they aren't just a duplicate of one another, that the lectures that we have, I think, really supplement some of the things that are in the book. And so it's worthwhile to get both the book and attend these programs. I think maybe without further ado, I'll let David start his talk. David?
Thank you, Bobby. As always, I'm deeply indebted to Bob Lee and the China Society, Chinese Historical Society, and the Textile Museum Associates for allowing me to spend time talking about a topic that I really enjoy and appreciate. One of the things that I have done in past is invite people to correspond with me as in between the lectures, and so it turns out that we've had 2 kinds of participation since the last lecture. One is interesting family photographs of president of photographs of Mr. Lim Hong and his wife, who were married in San Francisco in 1879. And this was provided by Su Chung, Professor Emerita from University of Nevada, Las Vegas Department of History. And here's a picture of Mr. Hong wearing his rank badge, getting ready to be married, a picture of his wife. And this is a close-up of the badge that he's wearing. At this time, it appears that he was a 5th level silver pheasant wearer. Later on in his career, he was promoted to the 1st level and wore a crane badge. One other email I got, it was a request that I share some information about the meanings of the different vegetation that were used in rank badges. This is a topic that's normally covered in a lecture on iconography, which was not part of this series of lectures. But in response to that request, here is a slide that you can go back and look at the YouTube version of this presentation if you need to refresh yourself or look for the meaning of any of the vegetation that's listed here. So for those, I won't go over all these introductory comments. They're the same ones that I've made in the last two lectures. The thing that I would emphasize is that tonight I am offering the insights that I've gained without claiming they're perfect. The topic of rank badges and the variation on rank badge design and evolution are way too complicated for anybody to be able to claim absolute mastery of the entire subject. But I offer what I think that I've learned about rank badges, hopefully to your benefit. We're talking about the later part of the Qing Dynasty and beyond tonight, and recalling that the Qing Dynasty badges were different from the Ming badges. They had borders were smaller, and they were split down the front badges were split down the front to accommodate their wearing on a short riding jacket that was typical of the mounted warriors that the Manchus were before they were the rulers of China proper. Last time we discussed the evolution rank badges through the Jiaqing Emperor, and so we'll pick up that story at about 1820 when the Daoguang Emperor ascended the throne. The Daoguang Emperor was not a very effective or dynamic ruler, and so we'll find that the design of badges kind of wandered for quite some time before it got settled into a fixed, recognizable Daoguang design. This is a badge that sits on the border between Jiaqing and Daoguang, and as any badge that is kind of an intermediary, whether or not you call it the last badge of the previous dynasty or the first badge of the coming dynasty, is kind of an arbitrary choice. This has the same cloud designs that we saw in the Jiaqing Emperor's reign, this kind of a vine-like construct with the little nodules that had the actual cloud formations and these kind of streamers that connected them. But it does have a Daoguang characteristic in that the clouds are kind of forming a border of the upper part of the badge. And this is something that will be a characteristic of most of the badges we'll see in the Daoguang period. It also incorporates the peaches, which were, again, a typical but not consistent element in Daoguang badges, and peonies and the sacred fungus. These are three of the four things that eventually became quintessential Daoguang elements. But after having seen them here in this initial thing, we're going to lose them for some considerable period while people are trying to figure out what Daoguang badges are supposed to look like. This is another early example of Daoguang, and you can see, again, the way that the clouds form kind of a half border on the upper part of the badge, and you have this kind of a cluster of clouds that comes down from the upper left-hand corner that fills in behind the sun. And that will be kind of a characteristic of most of the badges we'll see in Daoguang area. And if you'll recall that in the Yongjin period, we had clouds as the actual entire border around the badges. And so this is kind of a throwback to one of the designs in the Yongjin in the early 1700s. This is another example. Again, the only thing that this really has in common with the previous badge is that the clouds are forming the upper border on the interior of the badge. This is emblematic of the scroll work that we saw as one of the early examples of the Qinlong period, when the double layer of clouds were replaced with the scroll work. And so the kind of feel that I'm getting is that people were kind of picking and choosing various design elements from previous emperors' things to try and find something that kind of felt like the right answer for the Daoguang period. This is a military badge, a social badge for a wife, that again has this same clouds as upper border and the same scroll work we just saw. And just like the background filling stuff, either clouds or scroll work, just kind of vanished very abruptly in the Qinlong period, we see that it also occurred in the Daoguang period. We have the reintroduction of the peaches on the side and the peonies, but we don't yet have the bats, but we do have the clouds forming this border in the upper part and coming down from the upper left corner behind the sun. This is another example of that same kind of thing, a little different color palette, but the same general characteristics with the cloud formation, the peonies, and the peaches. Notice that here the peaches are in 3 clusters of 3, and previously they were in 4 clusters, but they always totaled 9. Peaches were a symbol of immortality, and 9 was also a word in Chinese that sounded like to expand and to include, and it was a magic number, also indicating longevity. Here is a mandarin duck that, again, has the peaches and the peonies and the fungus, but now we've finally gotten around, after our over-exuberant use of 11 bats in the initial badge we saw, we're starting to reintroduce the bats. We still have the same characteristic of the clouds, but now the clouds also are containing this very distinct white dot, which will become one of the characteristics of Daoguang clouds. And these dots were carried from the dots that were seen in the vine-like structure in the Jiaqing period. This particular mandarin duck was embellished with seed pearls, very, very tiny, and I'm sure very difficult to work with. The craftsmanship associated with using seed pearls of that size, it just kind of boggles my mind. Even how you would drill something that small without cracking it is something that just amazes me. This is another example, and this harkens back again to the Yongjin period, where the clouds were the border of the badge. There is no indication that this badge ever had a border other than the clouds. We now have the peaches, but we have the peaches in a particular configuration with 2 peaches, 3 and 2, again, totaling 9, but in this kind of a V shape, always 2, 2, 3, 2. And that particular configuration of the peaches will also become a hallmark of the later Daoguang badges. We now have the narcissus flowers and the fungus and the peonies. And so the only thing that we're missing now is we only have 2 bats here, and we need to get 3 more bats to complete what will become the quintessential Daoguang badge design. And of course, remember that 5 bats refer to the 5 happinesses: health, wealth, happiness, long life, and an easy death. This is one of my favorite Daoguang badges. The delicacy and presentation of this badge just, to me, is the epitome of Daoguang badges. And we now have the final design element that we're going to see. Our peaches with the 2-2, 3-2 configuration in this V form, 5 bats, the clouds with their distinctive white dots forming the upper part of the badge, with the peonies and the sacred fungus on the other side of the badge. This is a military badge, a social badge for a wife, that is just the mirror image of the badge that we saw before. Same clouds, the peaches are on the other side, obviously, it's a mirror image. The narcissus, the fungus, and the peonies, and the 5 bats. This is a counted stitch on gauze egret that shows that once the design got established, and again, we have the peaches, narcissus, fungus, and peonies, and the bats, that the background things, the things that were supposed to represent the good things in life, seem to be getting larger and seem to be crowding in on the rank bird in this particular instance. This is also an egret with a different representation of the head that was sometimes used for an egret. And again, the thing to look for here specifically is the way that the background elements, excuse me, are starting to dominate the appearance of the badge. And here it gets relatively extreme. I mean, the bird and the bats and everything are really cramped and surrounded by the 5 colored auspicious clouds and the designs that represent wealth and power and long life in both of these things, and an incorruptible official. This is a military representation of that same badge and that same characteristic, the same ballooning of the sizes of the background elements starting to crowd in on the tiger in this particular case. And this is the kind of unloved and unwanted 8th level quail official, who also has relatively large bats and peaches and peonies. The only thing that keeps this from being as crowded as the other badges is that the clouds are not quite as large. This is a counted stitch Siachai, and he's just kind of very tiny creature now in the center of the badge, where the most of the badge is devoted to auspicious signs and wishes for good things in life. This is also about the time that the Daoguang Emperor started to crack down on the opium trade, and tensions were starting to arise between China and the Western powers at this particular point. This is a crane badge from the same period. Notice how big the peaches are. Same thing with the bats, and the peonies are getting larger. We're also starting to see some more focus on wealth symbols and things that make badges a little more unusual. You see the seed stitch is being used for some of the details, in this case, the bats here. And the wealth symbols are starting to proliferate inside the water, indicating that people may have been more concerned about their financial well-being than they had been in the past. This crane was also embellished with seed pearls. This gives you a good view of how tiny and how intricate the application of those pearls were on the badges of this time. This is a Panther Badge. It is a regular badge for a wife. And at this particular point, she is also starting to have some of her design elements done in seed stitch to make it a little fancier and a little less typical of the design that has now just been locked in place and has not shifted appreciably for some couple of decades now. This is an example that shows a golden pheasant totally done in seed stitch, trying to establish the wearer as someone of unusual importance. But the more important thing is that we now have all of the Buddhist symbols in the water. And what this means to me, it's my interpretation, is that this is about the time that the First Opium War has concluded. China has now been forced to turn over control of Hong Kong to the British and pay an indemnity for the costs of the First Opium War. And they're concerned about the stability and the viability of the Qing government. And they are looking to Buddha to try and provide some assistance during this very trying period of time in their history. This is a military badge from the same thing. And notice that this is done again entirely in seed stitch. And we have all of the Buddhist symbols in the water here, indicating that the military who had taken the brunt of the Opium Wars were also appealing to Buddha for some assistance in dealing with the aggressive imperialist Western powers. At the end of the Daoguang period, I tend to not pay much attention about who was emperor. The reason being is that the emperor really was not a factor in the conduct of the government after the Daoguang emperor. The Xianfen emperor was a successor to Daoguang. He was picked because in an interview with him and his younger brother, the Daoguang emperor asked both of them what they would do if they were emperor after he died. The younger brother, who turned out to be Prince Gong and was one of the major interfacers with Western powers, gave a long list of policy changes that he thought were appropriate. The gentleman who had become the Xianfen emperor just cried. And when his father asked why he was crying, he said, "If I'm emperor, that means you're dead." And so the Daoguang emperor selected his older son to be emperor because he was filial and his younger brother was only smart. The Xianfeng emperor had a concubine whose name was eventually turned into Shixi. She fathered the next emperor, the Tangji Emperor. He became emperor at age 6. And there are various stories about him. He was very xenophobic. He hated the Western powers for what they had done during the First Opium War. He hated the officials that had yielded to the demands of the Western powers and became so disgusted with the whole thing that he retired to the summer palace and didn't bother with the administration of the empire at all. His mother, the Xianfeng emperor contracted tuberculosis and died. He only had a single son. He was 6 years old when he became emperor. He was a Tangji Emperor. His mother was Shishi. She was now the empress, so she was the Empress Shishi, and she encouraged her son to live a life of dissipation, so that he would take no interest in running the country, and the power then devolved on her. She is alleged to have had her son murdered when he was 18 and would start to rule independently. There are other versions of his death that say that he died from smallpox or died from sexually transmitted disease. But the more credible version is that Cixi decided that he was going to take power on his own, and she didn't want that to happen. She broke with tradition and had her nephew, her sister's son, declared the Guangxu Emperor. Now, he attempted to start some reforms for China because by the time he became the emperor, China had suffered through the Taiping Rebellion, which lasted for 14 years and took a large portion of the southern part of the country away from the court control. And they had also lost a very disastrous war with the Japanese in 1895. And that convinced him that he needed to initiate some reforms. He tried that in 1898. There was some resistance on the part of the Grand Dowager now, Cixi, and the conservative officials. He conspired with Wen Shikai, who was the military leader in the province that contained Beijing. But Wen Shikai betrayed the emperor and went to Cixi's closest military advisor, informed him of the plot to place Cixi under house arrest. So she moved first, and the Guangxu Emperor from 1898 until his death in 1908 was essentially under house arrest. So none of the emperors after Daoguang really played an important role. And so I tend to focus on historical events as opposed to the emperors or their personalities. One of the things that happened as a result of the locking of the design in the Daoguang Emperor's period and the ineffectiveness of subsequent emperors is the design kind of wandered, and there was no real focus or any single individual or personality driving the design as you'd had in previous imperial periods. So here we have a very interesting woven silk mandarin duck. The thing that was introduced in about 1850 was this representation of deep water that would stay with the badges till the end of the dynasty. One of the other things that happened because of the locking of the design is there seemed to be a proliferation of media so that if people couldn't differentiate their badges one from another by modifications in the design, they could at least do them in a different medium or a different presentation to try and stand out from the crowd and not just be, another badge wearer. Here we have a counted stitch on gauze siachai that represents one of the ways that media tended to proliferate about this time. They also started to hark back to previous imperial designs, kind of a nostalgic longing for the good old days. And so here we have a gold background reminiscent of Kangxi period. They reintroduced peacock feather that originally we used primarily in the border, in the rock, and in some of the trimmings on the birds in the Kangxi period. And this actually was peacock feather filaments twisted together to form a thread and then incorporated into the design. Very difficult and very delicate process. Only the badges from the 1800s still have areas of intact peacock feather. And this is a wild goose for an official from that period. Notice also this variation in the deep water design. The military also did that. And here we have, no, I'm sorry, this is a CHI, not a Chilin, another civil official that had incorporated peacock feather into his badge. And we also see a relatively extensive use of metallic thread in these things, again, to try and increase the flashiness and splendor of the badges. This is a final military badge, a lion, now that also is incorporating the metallic thread, the deep water design, and peacock feather. Again, it's hard for me to emphasize how rare peacock feather badges are. This is another woven badge. It's a peacock, obviously. Palette here tends to blue and white, which was another characteristic of the later period badges. Here we have another reversion to the gold background of Tangji Emperor's period, but notice that it also has the Buddhist symbols, so we're still looking for help from Buddha in the troubled times after the Daoguang Emperor. Some military badge of the same time with the same gold background and the Buddhist symbols in the water and in the air surrounding the animal. This is a counted stitch on gauze badge that shows the blue and white palette that was sometimes used, but it also represents one of the media that was used to proliferate the designs at this time. So wild goose that has one of the few design element changes incorporated in it. I tend to associate this with the period of the Taiping Rebellion, which was started in 1851. They took Nanjing in 1853. So probably this is late 1850s when the Taiping Rebellion became so much of a threat to the existence of the Qing dynasty that they not only had the Buddhist symbols in the water, but they also included the Taoist symbols in the air. So they apparently had concluded that Buddha was insufficient to help them, and they were looking not only for Buddhist help, but also help from the Taoist religion. This is a military badge that has the same general design, the Buddhist symbols in the water, Taoist symbols in the air. So the military was also looking for help wherever it could find it. So Paradise Flycatcher, again, Buddhist symbols in the water, Taoist symbols in the air. This is another example of the proliferation of the design elements. It has, again, Buddhist symbols in the water, Taoist symbols in the air, but now has a throwback to the scroll pattern completely covering the background that originally started in Qinlong period and was duplicated in Daoguang. It's another representation of the proliferation of design in an entirely metallic badge with coral sun, but again, representing the turmoil of the period, Buddhist symbols in the water, Taoist symbols in the air. The monochrome Brocade was another example of media that was used to differentiate one badge from another. Came in two colors, as kind of a yellow ochre and the white and black. In about the mid 1600s and the mid 1860s to late 1860s, the Chinese started to import chemical aniline dyes from Europe. And we see that expressed in the rank badges with these very bright, vivid colors that had heretofore been relatively muted colors associated with the vegetable dyes that the Chinese had used traditionally. And so when you see these very bright, vibrant colors, particularly the purple, you know that you're talking about a badge that came after the mid 1860s or later, when the aniline dyes were common. One other characteristic that we need to note here is that this is an applique badge. You can see around the feet and the legs that this badge was made separately from the background. And then it was just sewn onto this background. There was a reason for that. The reason that the applique badges came into fashion was that the reparations from the First and Second Opium Wars, as well as the loss of revenue during the Taiping Rebellion, put a great deal of stress on the court finances. And as a result, there was widespread selling late in the Qing dynasty of the authority to wear a rank badge. So you had rich merchants and other people who had not passed the civil service exams were wearing rank badges that they had purchased. And as they bought their way up the ladder of ranks, they didn't want to have to replace this entire expensive badge. So the applique badges came into fashion. So when you bought the next rank, you could just have the bird cut off the badge and your next rank applied on the same badge, and you wouldn't have to replace your entire costume. And again, the costume cost somewhere in the vicinity of 4,000 taels of silver, which is slightly over 5,200 ounces of silver, which would run to about $15,000 or $20,000 in today's money at the exchange rate for silver. This is an example of an empty background and indicates that the background was in fact made separately from the birds. And you could go into a rank badge store then, pick your background, pick your bird, and just have the bird sewn on whatever background you thought was appropriate. But I need to emphasize, because this will be important later in the presentation, to remember that the background and the birds were made separately. And if you happen to see an applique badge sometime that's offered for sale, you need to look at the bird and the background differently, because one may be authentic and the other may not be. One of the characteristics of applique badges was that the workmanship and the quality of the presentation tended to deteriorate as the badges became less a symbol of literary and intellectual accomplishment and perhaps just a sign of wealth. And so you see a relatively crude badge here, clearly an applique badge of silver pheasant on a relatively unsophisticated, just large background elements, not particularly well done. This is an example of what I would think of would be the quintessential rich merchant's wife badge. All of these threads in the interior of the badge are metallic threads. The color that you perceive here is a result of a very dense couching of those metallic threads with colored silk. And so, like the very early Yongjin peacocks that we saw that were the first metallic thread badges in existence, this represents that badge. It even has a Yongjin water form in it, but it also represents the technique of having an all-metallic badge that shows color from the couching threads, but shows the flash of the gold when it's seen in bright sunlight. As I said, in 1898, the Guangxu Emperor tried to start a reform process to bring China's governmental system and economic system more in line with the Western powers that had dominated it militarily in the latter half of the 1800s. So he decreed personally that there would be a new design for rank badges. And in order to discourage conspicuous consumption and what he considered the waste of resources in buying frivolous things, he wanted the badges to be very simple and plain, contained only the rank creature, the sun, and the clouds. And what he was trying to do in this particular regard was focus people on the investment of their economic power as opposed to wasting it on frivolous, conspicuous consumption. So here we have a golden pheasant that is in the design that the emperor wanted the badges to have. And this is a qilin that also shows that the military, at least part of them, fell in step with the emperor's designs. However, there was a group of conservative officials who opposed the emperor's reform periods, reforms that he was trying to execute during this period. The badges show this very clearly. Here you have a badge where there's only sparse clouds, but you have this swastika fret with the wand here standing for 10,000 and the bats for happiness. So really more of a focus on infinite happiness than adherence to the emperor's desires for the design of the rank badge. Now, it's hard for me to convey what a radical step this really was. If you wore an improper rank badge, if you wore a rank badge that faced away from the emperor in court, you were courting death by slicing, what the Chinese also called the lingering death, what people in the West called death from 1,000 cuts. And this could be a multi-day process where various parts of your body was periodically sliced off. And these officials, obviously opposing the emperor's personal desires, were running the risk of that kind of a death. And they would only have done so if they had some very strong backing by some very important people that they knew would protect them from the emperor's wrath. That person was a Grand Dowager Empress Cixi. But you have to view this departure from the specific design that was imposed by the emperor as a representation of a very strong political opposition to what the emperor was trying to do, and the existence of an overpowering support structure that would protect them from the emperor's wrath. This is a silver pheasant designed for a lady that apparently was trying to incorporate every possible bat rebus that existed in the universe. But again, this proliferation of things that were the antithesis of the emperor's express design was an overwhelming one-finger salute to the emperor at this time. It's a very, very serious breach of etiquette, discipline, and reverence to the emperor. military was not immune from this process. So here we have a lion badge that was done for an official that also contains rebuses in it in opposition to the emperor's desires. So there were clearly military people who supported the Grand Dowager Empress in her opposition to the emperor's reforms. This is quite striking to me because this is a Siachai badge, and the wearers of the Siachai were the people who were supposed to enforce the emperor's dictates. And here was somebody who was supposed to be out making sure people followed the imperial edicts, and he was violating one of the imperial edicts himself. So when the reform period ended in 1898, when the Grand Dowager Empress and Yuan Shikai conspired to put the emperor under house arrest, we had a dramatic and remarkable transformation in the appearance of rank badges. And I've shown the badges, the 5 badges here, because the details of the particular designs are not important. And what we need to focus on is the general shape and configuration of the internal part of the badge. This process started out relatively innocently with the inclusion of flowers in the corner of the badge. Remember that the emperor was under house arrest, and people thought that he could not enforce his dictates. And they had gotten away with modifying his reform period badges, but death by slicing was not something that one risked cavalierly. So they took a very cautious approach to starting this process. What then happened is the border started to increase in size and thickness, and you had an even more rounded corner to the rank badges, and you started to get kind of an oval shape. Then here the design in the corner, in this place, bats instead of flowers, and the border have expanded to produce an unambiguous circle inside the badges. And when nobody was sliced up for that, they became quite explicit and put an unambiguous statement that there is a circle inside this square badge. And of course, finally, then we had the circular badge itself. This was an irrigation of the symbol of the imperial authority. It indicated a total and absolute disrespect for the authority of the emperor. And the design of this badge essentially is the death knell of the Qing dynasty. Here is a design. Some of the badges were quite elaborate. This badge is done in black and white pearls, coral, and obviously metallic thread throughout. This is a less extravagant badge done for a Paradise Flycatcher official. And there's an interesting differing mixed message badge. The interior of this badge adheres to the emperor's design on his reform period badges. And that indicates that the person is saying, yes, emperor, I support you and I support your reform policies, but I'm wearing a badge in a circular design, which shows my contempt for your authority. So it's really a mixed political message in that particular badge. That was the end of the imperial system. The Grand Dowager Empress Cixi died in 1908 of a stroke. The official story was that the Guangxu Emperor died of, quote, natural causes, unquote, the same day that Cixi died. It took exactly 100 years for there to be a tissue sample from the Guangzhou Emperor analyzed, and that examination indicated that the level of arsenic in his system was 2,000 times normal. So it was quite clear that the Guangzhou Emperor was murdered by officials who were afraid of his retribution should he escape house arrest. So that was the end of the Qing dynasty. In effect, you had the Tangji Emperor, better known in the West as Puyi, who was nominally emperor for 3 years, but it was only 3 years before the Qing dynasty was overthrown with the Republican Revolution. At the end of the Qing dynasty, beginning of the Republican period, Wan Shikai, the traitor who had betrayed the Guangzhou Emperor, was formally nominated as first president of China in its Republican guise. And Wan Shikai thought that being emperor was a pretty good thing, and he tried to retain some of the trappings of the imperial period. And so he had a series of badges designed for himself and his officials that have become known as Republican badges. Now, rather than use the normal symbols of rank, the Republican badges used the 12 symbols of sovereignty that had been incorporated into the informal robes of the emperors in the revision of the court regulations that were published in 1759. So rather than stay too closely tied to the imperial system, he adopted the 12 symbols of sovereignty. This particular example is one of 2 badges that come from Chris Hall, the only badges that I've seen of this type, marvelously done. I think you can even see the 3-dimensionality of the dragons here that are shown. They're just not embroidered, but they're embroidered over padding to give them a 3-dimensional appearance. Everything except the details on the bird and the dragon's mouth is done in coral, so that the sun, the flames are all done in coral, as are the flames along the dragon's body. But you have the 12 symbols of sovereignty, the constellation, the mountains, the sun, the moon, the flame, the water weed, the libation cups, the plate of grain, the axe and the fu. All 12 of those symbols were incorporated into the badges for Wan Shikai. The badges for his officials are not well documented, but with the examples, we know that there were 10 symbol badges, 9 symbol badges, 7, 5, and 3 symbol badges for the various levels in the bureaucracy. All of the badges below the 12 symbol badges for Wan Shikai are relatively crudely done. They are about the quality of what I would consider be children's badges in the late Qing dynasty. So if you're interested in Republican badges, you're interested in badges that have historical interest, not necessarily ones that are aesthetically pleasing. When the Qing dynasty went away, there were all these rank badges available that it really had no pragmatic use. So they were often sold to tourists or people who were living and working in China. But eventually the supply of those badges ran out, but the supply of tourists was still there. And so people began to make badges after the imperial period, specifically for the purpose of selling them to tourists in one guise or another. They were oftentimes made into purses, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But they were also put in tea trays and just framed as decorative items to be hung on the wall. What we have here on the left is an export badge, And with it, we have a comparable real badge from the Qing Dynasty period. And once you see those two badges side by side, I think that export badges will become relatively clear to you and easy to recognize. But you see the relatively round head, the thick neck, and the tail feathers just have no movement or motion to them at all. It's just rigidly straight, as opposed to the shaped head, the curved neck, and the kind of flowing tail feathers in the real badge. So this was a badge that was done after the Imperial period ended, but it still served an economic purpose and could be sold to tourists. I do note, however, that there was an apparent residue of reverence for the people who had been noted Confucian scholars during the Imperial period. And most export badges are 9th level bird paradise flycatchers. And that to me indicates that there was a certain residual reverence to the officials who had been noted Confucian scholars. Now, as I noted, the badges were often made into purses. We saw this purse in the Jia Qing portion of the lecture. This was a clutch purse. There were silk pockets sewn on the other side of the purse to hold the belongings. That purse was just folded and held under your arm. This purse on the right is a more typical one where they essentially just put two rank badges together and sewed up three sides of them and put some kind of a handle or tassel on them to make it convenient to carry. Not infrequently, you'll find jade bangles used as handles for these purses, which makes the jade bangles the most valuable part of the whole thing. This purse is a little unusual in that it is actually shaped, and so the inside of the badge was cut and modified. Most of the purses were just square purses. The badges were just sewed up three sides, handles attached, and then sold to tourists. Somebody finally decided that making two separate badges was too much trouble, so they started to make these export badges specifically tying the purses together. So if you ever see a pair of badges like this, where they are made foot to foot, neither badge is split, and they're clearly export badges, you know for certain sure that this was a pair of badges that was made explicitly to be made into a purse, and now all they had to do was sew up two sides of the badge as opposed to sewing up three sides of the badge before they added the handles. Now, you'll sometimes also encounter a birthday badge. There's nothing wrong with buying a birthday badge if you're interested in a birthday badge. You just shouldn't buy a birthday badge thinking it's a rank badge. The birthday badges come in various configurations, various palettes. This is a very colorful badge. You often find these in monochrome, black and white, or shades of yellow, the way that you had monochrome rank badges late in the Qing Dynasty. But the key element is the circle in the center with a single-tailed phoenix. And if you see that, you know that you are looking at a birthday badge. Now, we've talked about this before, and why it's important that you be familiar not only with the badges that we discussed today, which are the ones you're most likely to see if you're shopping for rank badges, but fake badges are not limited to Daoguang, and they're getting very, very good. Now, I've shown this before once very briefly. This is a badge that I own. I bought this explicitly because I thought it was fake, and I wanted to be able to have an excellent fake to include in the book. And after a close examination, I determined that it clearly was fake. Now, I'm reluctant to get into too much detail about why I believe that this is a fake badge, because as soon as the word gets out and is generally known, people who counterfeit badges read books and listen to people giving lectures on YouTube and stuff. And once the people understand that they've made a mistake, they'll correct it, and fake rank badges will get even harder to detect, and they're getting very hard now. Let me note just one thing here that you might want to look at. You see the scroll border here and the scroll border here. The sun is superimposed over the cloud here and superimposed over the cloud here. But here, the gold is strictly horizontally placed. Here, the gold is patterned. So one of the things that you have to look for is whether or not the iconography and the design has the elements that existed together. And in this particular instance, you had the scroll and the sun associated with a background pattern that was inconsistent with real badges. So let's look at these two, this fake badge with a badge that has the same horizontal gold background, and notice the difference in the border. And again, this emphasizes the need to understand what elements of design coexisted and which ones didn't. That kind of examination, both with the previous crane badge and this leopard badge, give you some strong indication that you need to look very closely at this badge, because it may not, in fact, be appropriate and authentic. Now, these badges on the left, I received in an email from both Live Auctioneers and Invaluable. I got them this month. They are offered for sale for $28,000 to $38,000 estimate. These badges are not mine, and I don't want to get any legal trouble, so I'm not going to make any comment about whether or not I think that these badges are authentic or not. But I would call a couple of items to your attention. These badges appear to be wider than they are tall. These badges over here appear to be taller than they are wide. If you look at the color palette in this badge and compare it to the color palette here, you may detect some differences which may lead you to believe that there may be some question about the authenticity of the badges on the left. Not saying they're fake, but there may be some reason to question them. Here, if you just look at the cloud designs, I think that the differences are relatively plain. You need to make your own determination about whether or not you think these badges on the left are authentic or not, but it does emphasize that even Ming badges are being offered in the marketplace today, and you might be well advised to understand something about the Ming designs in order to protect yourself from paying a very large price for a badge that you may not eventually like. I wrote a book. Everybody knows that, that's been around. If you're not, you can kind of look at the details later on. Now, one of the other ways that people have participated or interacted with me since the last presentation is at least two people have sent me some rank badges. What I would like to do now is two things. Number one, show you some of the badges that I've been sent. And second thing, ask Felicia to open up the audience to comment on these badges, and we'll see whether or not anybody wants to make an assessment as to whether or not these badges are real or not, and whether and where they would like to place them in the evolution of the design element. And I know that Chuck Wu, if he is on now, has done an excellent job in cataloging the badges in the collection of Pacific Asia Museum. So if he's here, I hope that he will speak up. So here's the first badge, and I will turn control over to Felicia and Bob to monitor the comments that you'd like to make about this badge.
Well, I think the badge looked like a golden eagle, the golden eagle of the United States that you would find in a Great Seal.
In fact, you can see what he's holding in his claws.
Yeah. Here are the arrows, and here are the palm tree. And I believe you're correct, Chuck. And to me, that means that this is a fake badge. I mean, I'm not quite sure what motivated anybody to produce this badge, but it is clearly not an authentic Chinese rank badge. It's not unusual to find really weird designs called Chinese rank badges and offered in the marketplace. So if you're interested in buying badges, don't be surprised if you see something like this, and don't be hesitant to declare it as not authentic. Does anybody else want to say anything about that badge? I only mentioned Chuck because I know that he has done this kind of work and done it well, but please don't be intimidated by either him or me. And if you want to express an opinion, please do so. And it's all free and clear. Nobody is going to shake a finger or laugh at anything that anybody has to say. Here's the next badge. This is interesting.
This looks like a golden pheasant based on the bands on the feathers.
I believe you're correct.
Then I see the flowers on the corners. So that's probably just after the reform period.
Yes, oops. Yes, those, again, that was one of the elements that introduced the transition from square badges to circular badges. The border in this particular badge seems also to be the stylized dragon with the interwoven scroll work that was also common to that period.
Why does it have these strange layers of clouds? Is that typical of a certain period?
Excellent question. So what we have done is identify those characteristics which tend to make us think that this is an authentic badge. But Bob has put his finger on one of the things that makes us question whether or not this is an authentic badge. Where have we ever seen bands of clouds like this?
Also, are those waves authentic? They look very, they're moving a lot.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The waves look really different. There's a lot of movement. There's kind of going toward the center there from left and right.
Yes. This kind of a treatment in here is a bit unusual. Okay. that's a good point. Is there anybody else? There are two more things we need to look at.
The border, the gold border.
The gold border, again, is of the period.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
very stylized dragon. I mean, you perceive that, I mean, you can, I mean, it takes a good imagination, but here's his head and his body and legs, and it comes down to his tail here. It's a very stylized dragon, but it was used as a border in that period.
You don't see typical bats that are color like this.
Excellent. That's one other thing. This multicolor bat, particularly with the extremely bright colors, is very unusual. And you don't see female numbers of bats typically on badges. Now in the Daoguang, we saw a couple of examples of 2 bat badges. So that's female numbers are not unheard of. But when you try and get to 5, you don't get to 6. The 6th bat has no meaning. It's the 5 bats that refer to the 5 blessings. And so 5 is a meaningful number. 6 is not a meaningful number in that characteristic, and it's a female number on a male badge. Also, where is the sun?
Oh, yeah.
There's no sun.
Okay, so we've had 2 things that say this might be, and the bird is not obviously out of the period. So we have 2 things, maybe 3, that say this might be an authentic badge. But we have 5 different things that make us question the authenticity of this badge. And it's the accumulation of the questions that generally tends to incline me to say, I'm not for positive sure that this is not authentic, but I don't want to risk my money. Also note that the clouds here are missing the white dot that was characteristic after the Daoguang period. Okay, so overall, although there are a couple of items that appear to be authentic, there are sufficient issues with this badge that make me say, I will give this badge a pass if it were offered to me to purchase. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, next badge.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Let me say something about that. I bought this badge, and it's larger than most badges, and it was the cover to a album or something. So it was just entirely different and was inexpensive.
Yeah, but like I said, after the Imperial period, it was not unusual for badges to be repurposed, whether as a purse, as a decorative item under glass in a tea tray, something to hang on the wall. They are often, particularly front badges, on open writing portfolios. The first peacock badge I ever got, I removed from the covers of a writing portfolio. So the badges, the fact that badge came as a cover to an album or something is not unusual at all. After the Imperial period, badges were frequently repurposed in a number of different ways, but it's the design elements in this badge that bring it into question, not the way it was used. Are we done here? Okay. Do I need to start this off? The design of this badge is either the second or third step along the transition from a square badge to a circular badge. You see the border and the elements in the corners have been expanded. There is a clear, unambiguous circle in here. We have an applique badge, which is characteristic of that period, and iconography that is big, clunky things, not necessarily very aesthetically produced. It's unusual, and this is a quail badge, but it's my assessment, my opinion would be that this is an honest to God real badge. Bob, this is also yours. Is there another badge on the
Yes,
other?
yes. Mhm.
Okay, so this is a very, sorry, is the other badge split?
I think so.
Okay, if it's split, then that adds to the authenticity of this. All of the design characteristics are consistent with themselves and with that particular period. What we have that's unusual here is not the badge, but a relatively elaborate top to this purse that much more elaborate than was usually done. But the conversion of a pair of badges into a purse was not unusual. And again, this badge appears to have all of the characteristics of badges of that particular period. And if the backside is split, that just adds to the authenticity. And very unusual, and this is a quail badge. And quails are just hard to find under any circumstances. Are we done? Anybody?
Oh, my gosh.
It's a applique bird type. It's a circular within the square. It looks crowded, and then the bird is much larger than usual that you would see in the, in the Mandarin badges.
I'm with you on all that.
Hmm.
Okay, to elaborate, again, you have the stylized dragon with the scroll work that is representative of the period, the enlarged corner design, forcing the interior to be in the shape of a circle. You have a bird that looks like it might not actually have been made for this badge, but since it's an applique badge, that's not unusual. Remember, the badge and the background were made separately. You have these kind of a big clunky items of iconography that are not all that aesthetically oriented, and you have the metallic thread. All of those are characteristics of badges of this particular period and incline me to believe that this is an authentic badge.
It's not what?
Say
Dave,
again?
is that typical that you see on with the bats on each corner? That's not what you would usually see a pattern.
We did see in one of the transition periods where the flowers had been replaced by bats, and whether or not you want to perceive this as flowers or bats depends on whether or not you see that as a head, and whether or not these are stylized wings. And this could be a bat tail, but regardless of the design, I mean, they started with flowers, but frequently you also see bats in the corner. And both the flowers or the bats, whichever happen to be used in any particular badge, then expanded in size in order to force the interior of the badge into the circular design. So I'd bet money that this is good. Are we done?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dragons are always hard, at least hard for me anyway. And that's because the dragons take up so much space in the badge that there's not much room for iconography. And it's iconography that I key on to try and date the badge. So with the understanding that dragons are hard, who wants to take a stab at this?
What did you say about bats? There are 4 here?
No,
No, 5, 6.
I
8.
see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, 8.
8. Yeah. That's for symmetry, I suspect. Anybody want to take a stab at this?
Do those clouds look okay to you?
The clouds are Daoguang clouds, in my estimation. And the reason to say that is that they're all mushroom shaped.
Ah,
They all have the white dots and they flow together in long strings. They're not clumped the way that Qinlong clouds were clumped. And so these speak to me as Daoguang clouds. Also notice that we have the Buddhist symbols here.
You know, I don't see the dragon as a typical dragon that has, you know, spiny spikes on the back. And then the cloud itself doesn't look typical. They look like kind of blunt.
I hear I'm not an expert on dragons.
Neither am I.
The thing that I note is that this appears to me to be a regular late Qing dragon. You notice that the body curls in this direction. And the only dragons that curled in the other direction are dragons that were worn on the right shoulder. So this would be the shape and form of a dragon that appeared on the chest, the back, the left shoulder, or in the lower part of a robe. So the two things, if you recall, the Buddhist symbols were introduced into the Daoguang badges about 1840, about the time, my assessment, about the time of the first Opium War. And the fact that we have Daoguang clouds with Buddhist symbols kind of tends to reinforce in my head that this comes from the late Daoguang period. The other thing that is really significant and very, very important, everybody needs to take cognizance of this fact, that before 1759, the only person who was authorized to wear a show symbol on a dragon badge was the emperor. After the regulations were modified in 1759, the emperor's use of the showpiece kind of devolved to members of the imperial family, and the emperor incorporated the 12 symbols of sovereignty into his informal robes. If you see a badge of any kind, primarily dragon badges, but remember, imperial princes of levels 9 through 12 were not princes of the blood. They were nobles of the imperial lineage, and they wore circular animal badges with the showpiece. And
I'm looking at the 12 o'clock. This is more than just a long life. I think here on either side, that means long life. In the middle is fortune. So whole the word, there was a combination of several words in here. It's a long life, fortune, and a couple of swastikas that means long life of 10,000 years.
yes, yeah, the Chinese use 10,000 to refer to infinity, and so when they said may the emperor live for 10,000 years, they really meant may the emperor live forever. So yeah, the swastika has this meaning of forever or continuous or without end. But it is a showpiece that makes this kind of unambiguous. This not only was a dragon badge, but it was a dragon badge for the imperial family.
Could it be a birthday badge or
I'm sorry.
the emperor? Could that be a birthday badge? Because up here, you know,
when you get out of the realm of regular rank badges into festival badges and birthday badges, things like that, I end up pretty ignorant pretty fast. So I to me
yeah,
this
because the combination of words combined into one design here that make me think that maybe for birthday for anybody over 60 years old, younger people, you will not get this kind of a logo on it.
Yeah, I mean that goes to Confucian philosophy about when a person was born, they were given a certain quantity and quality of qi, and the quantity of qi determined how long they would live, and the quality of the qi determined what their innate personality and characteristics would be. People who lived a long time had clearly been given a great quantity of qi by heaven, and therefore they were respected by heaven, and it was incumbent on everybody else to respect heaven's decision. So old people, had a reverence that was associated with a large amount of qi that was granted by heaven.
David, most of the animals we see in side profile, is it unusual to see an animal where you see a frontal?
That was a difference in the rank of dragons. The regular dragons had 4 ranks, and it depended on their position and the number of claws. And so a front-facing 5-toed dragon was the senior dragon. That is, reinforces the showpiece as a member of the imperial family. A 5-toed profile dragon was the second dragon in precedence. The 4-toed front-facing dragon, the Mong dragon, as opposed to the Lung dragon, was the third in precedence. And the profile 4-toed dragon was the lowest regular dragon in priority. So it went front-facing 5, profile 5, front-facing 4, profile 4. So whether or not the dragon was in a front-facing or profile or walking posture was indicative of the rank of the person who wore that badge.
Yeah, fascinating.
Okay, are we done here? This is really, I'm relatively sure this is your badge. You got a good one here.
Yeah, the reason why I put it out was because a friend of mine had a very nice dragon badge that he said was fake. And it didn't belong to him, but he said the main giveaway was that instead of having the show above the dragon, it had a little bird or something.
Yeah.
But it was a very nice, I mean, from the picture, it looked fabulous.
Yeah. Well, maybe you should tell him you'd be willing to take that fake badge off his hands.
No, it wasn't his, it was his friend's.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's move.
This one probably looks like a Mandarin duck with the commas on the body and the neck.
I'm with you on the comma marks. wedge-shaped tail.
Oh, it's a wild goose. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Smooth head.
Yeah, it's a wild goose there.
Yes, sir, it is.
So is it typical for a wild goose to have that kind of bump on the neck below the beak, between the beak and the comma part? That sort of jutting out part?
This part here,
Yeah,
it's not unusual. I wouldn't be excited about that. Quite frequently, a neck is shown is other than a smooth curve.
Hmm.
Okay.
I see some Buddhist symbols in the sky background.
Yeah, we've seen this scroll background with the all metallic badges and the coral sun. The deep water design. This is all consistent with that particular period, and so this is a late period Qing dynasty, probably just before the Reform period. This was where they were trying to mix up the media in order to differentiate their badges from Daoguang kind of standard design. So I think that one's real too.
Wow.
This is the flycatcher, and I see the Buddhist symbols in the waters and Taoist symbols in the sky.
Yep.
And flowers, flowers,
Yep.
Pyrenees flowers, and
Yep.
lozenges and coins I see also in the sky.
Yes.
Kinds of flowers.
Yeah.
And the lotus.
And the rebus for eternal happiness, or may all your wishes be granted forever, with the Ruyi scepter and the swastika. Yeah. To me, this is a straightforward example of kind of what I refer to as kind of the Taiping design, where you had both Buddhist and Taoist symbols, Buddhist in the water, Taoist in the air. Straightforward, run-of-the-mill kind of nice badge in good condition for a badge of that period. So nice badge. I think that's a keeper. Now these three are from a gentleman, Frank Diao, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, from Canada, who may have joined us tonight. He said he intended to. He asked that he had three badges that he asked to have examined and discussed tonight.
Those aren't natural dyes for sure.
No, but remember the
Yeah.
aniline dyes after the mid 1860s. So the bright colors. That's a good point, and that's the way that you start analyzing things. This badge has to have the design elements that are appropriate for 1860 or 70 and later. Okay, so the clear use of aniline dyes has already given us a clue as to when this badge might have been produced.
Now, is that a sun? I mean, there's the big round red sun, and then there's another thing with sort of swirly spokes diagonally from that on the other side of the bird. Is that, yeah.
That's
What
a
is
Buddhist. I see that as Buddhist wheel of law,
Ah, okay.
and that's commensurate with the other Buddhist symbols here.
How about the band in the above the water? Is that the cloud?
The purple and yellow one?
Yes. Is that a little special?
With this?
The band? No.
This?
Just above the water.
Yeah.
Oh,
just
this?
No, the strip that's going across
Yeah,
the water.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that design we didn't see it before.
Yes.
the
yes.
waves, right? Waves.
No, I think those are clouds, but the clouds frequently were combined with the water element. They might have meant that to be mist or something associated with it, but clouds in or near the water is not something that should upset us.
No, I mean the design of the cloud.
Well, that is a little unusual.
We have never seen a cloud
Yes.
design that pattern.
I hear that. That's a good observation.
The graphic work right above that area, all that geometric, that's unusual. I haven't seen that
This?
up to now. Yes, that whole area, this horizontal, the horizontal stripe is just very, very geometric.
Yeah, this is more geometric, but I'm seeing this as the spray coming off the rocks and the mountain on the side. It's a very stylized
Yes,
version of the spray, but normally the spray that comes off, is a little more curved like this.
yes.
But this is much sharper and more geometric than what you would normally see. And that's an interesting observation. The same thing with the water here. That is an unusual
Yes.
presentation of the water.
Well, this is count stitched or
I can't tell it, and I
can't really tell, but if it were count stitch, it sort of would tend to be this type of angular design.
It
wouldn't
could.
it?
Yes, I hear. Nobody's mentioned these.
I think this bird, because it's colorful and it's
Yeah.
two-tailed with the bands. So my thinking is it's probably more close to a golden pheasant.
I'm with you. Notice the black marks here.
Applique.
It is.
Okay, yeah.
It is. And it's hard to tell, and I don't know how detailed and how crisp the image are, but there's a very, very thin black band in these areas of white. So it's not all white. There is a black band, a black edge to that white color. And so you have a colorful bird with a crested head, black markings on its neck and tail, two long sword-shaped tail feathers. So golden pheasant really is comfortable here. There's nothing about this bird that strikes me as being unusual. Nobody said anything about these yet.
I mean, the flowers?
Yes,
Oh, yeah, it's
okay. And it's the start of the transition into
transition.
the circular bed. The border is commensurate with the stylized dragon with the interweave scroll patterns. And I'm sorry? So we have the aniline dyes, which make this after the mid 1860s. We have the flowers, which makes it after the reform period. Those two things are consistent. We have the deep water that is associated with that time period. The border appears to be appropriate. We have the Buddhist symbols, which were used after 1840. There's nothing about this badge that leaps out at me and says there's something wrong with it. It does have unusual characteristics, a very stylized representation of the water and the spray off the mountain and the rock. And the clouds are in fact different, but we need to keep in mind that the one unvarying rule about rank badges is there is no unvarying rule about rank badges. And so accepting variations and deviations, as long as they don't contradict main combinations of iconography, is something we probably need to learn to live with.
I think the cloud pattern also showing the symbol of 10,000 years. Take a close look at it.
Mhm. Okay.
It's swastika all over in the back in the
Yeah.
background.
And we've seen the swastika fret pattern in the background of several badges from the late Qing period. So that's not something that we would necessarily cause us to raise our eyebrows in concern.
Dave, one question. You mentioned about the border. It's a dragon motif. Is this a common figure?
Yes, sir. In the late Qing dynasty, it was this very stylized dragon.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Are there any Chinese words in the border you mentioned about dragon? I see mountain over here. A few batches ago, I see those E's just in the opposite directions rather than the open end facing outside, the open end facing inside. If you look at the border, about 3 batches ago.
Okay.
And
I'm not, I'm not sure.
That's symmetrical.
I don't read Chinese and I speak it horribly, what little I can get out of my mouth. And so I would not presume to see any Chinese characters here.
There's a mountain over here, for example, mountain here,
Yeah.
mountain, Chinese character.
Yeah.
It looked like an upside down table if you look on the bottom.
No, it's not Chinese character.
No, well, Shan is Chinese character.
I
Yeah,
know.
I would perceive it to be the stylized dragon's head myself, but like I say, I don't read Chinese, and if somebody wanted to correct me on that, I would not be offended. But I do perceive this symbol here and here to be a stylized dragon's head.
Now, what does the capital E, the open end facing outside rather than inside on the border? A couple of batches ago that you showed the border.
I'm not following. Should I back up?
Yes, please.
Tell me when to stop.
Okay,
Here?
no, go ahead, keep going.
More?
More. More. Okay, look at this one here. This one, oh, you passed it. Go back to the one before. On the bottom here, there's 2 E's. You see the open end facing inside rather than outside.
Yes.
And if you're facing outside, this one of the symbols. I don't know what that means with the.
Again, I tend to see that as the dragon's head. That there.
Isn't that symbol
There should-
similar to the one that you would see on the dragon robe?
In the middle, says Lingji, that this looks like a fungus, in
Fungus,
between.
scepter, yeah, fungus.
Yeah. But this one, the open end facing the outside would be one of the symbols or Buddhist symbols.
Yeah.
Well, it does look like a dragon head on the other border.
See, for example, over here on top, mountains inverted, like a T, capital T. If you invert it back, it's mountain in Chinese.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Oh.
It's not.
You know-
It's upside down.
There's one on
Yeah.
the bottom.
Yeah, this one mountain, this one on the side, mountain on the side, on top it's upside down, mountain.
Yes.
On the bottom,
Well,
it
it does look like dragon legs.
Talking about here. Here, it's upside down mountain.
On top here,
Yeah.
on top, next to the centerpiece would be upside down on both sides, mountain, and then
It's
Yeah.
again.
it's a mountain.
It's possible, and one of the things we need to remember is that the people who wore these badges were Confucian scholars, and poetry and rhymes and subtle meanings and double entendres were second nature to these men. And I suspect that they enjoyed incorporating subtle meanings in the design of their badges that would only be recognized by other Confucian scholars.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a certain amount of gamesmanship and intellectual challenge associated with some of the designs.
I wonder, by some stretch of imagination, I just wonder they may represent the dwelling of the 8 immortals. But dwelling, only mortals may reach those peaks. Mortals can never reach the Pen Line Mountain.
Yes.
No, it is not a word of mountain because the middle stroke is having a hook. The word mountain does not rise.
No, the hook doesn't matter, depending on the style how you're writing it.
Let us proceed,
Let's
please.
go back.
So next to last one.
That's embroidered on gauze or something?
I'm not sure that it is, and again, I haven't seen these badges in anything other than the pictures that you've seen them. I am perceiving this to be embroidered because I don't see any ragged edges along the wings here. And that's normally where you would see the pixelation of a counted stitch on gauze. Well, I'm believing that this is embroidered, but I wouldn't want to swear to that. This is getting long, so let me say, this is very similar to the badge we've seen of Bobby's that had the enlarged corner, in this case flowers, forcing the internal into a circle with an unambiguous, surround of the circle, applique badge, an unusual presentation on the inside of the vegetation. Again, one needs to think in terms of the background and the badge as separate entities. The bird looks absolutely authentic and clean. You might want to be concerned a little bit about the background badge. The color palette is unusual for pink. The fact that it's a female badge kind of makes that less unusual, but this is an unusual representation of the vegetation that one normally sees in a rank badge. And so one might want to have a little question about the background. The bird appears to be absolutely spot on.
Excuse me.
One final badge.
The lotus flower has a meaning connect with Buddhism. Buddha said on the lotus flower in many, Buddhist texts.
Yeah. Well, you have
Yeah, you have the
It doesn't.
you have the fish, the conch shell, the endless knot, the Buddha wheel of law.
Yes, that's true.
So my take is that lotus is one of the 8 Buddhist symbols combined with the other Buddhist symbols. Like say we got the fish, the conch shell. We should have, here's the parasol, and this should be the umbrella. And so we have the 8 Buddhist symbols there.
Yes.
The lotus being one of them.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Hugus, is Frank. Sorry to interrupt you. For the previous photo, I just checked, the conversation because a friend of mine told me that the technique of the previous badge is made is by the technique of Nasha. I don't know much about it, but I was told the technique to make the badge is Nasha. Is that a?
Yeah.
I can type it, but I'm not sure what's the how to say it exactly. Because I think in Chinese it's called this way.
Yeah.
Maybe I was wrong.
Okay, well, as I confessed before, I don't speak or read Chinese, so I wouldn't be familiar with the Chinese term, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are 4 beds of the periphery here on each side, one on each side.
Okay, I will also type Chinese, but maybe there is another terminology for this in Chinese. Maybe someone can translate it, because I'm not, I'm just beginner of, buying all this stuff. It's a new domain, so maybe I misunderstood. That's possible.
Mhm.
Sorry.
No.
Can somebody translate? Because I'm typing it in Chinese. I'm not sure, if somebody can translate in the English, or there's another terminology. Anyway, I just wanted to, to see what I was told.
Okay.
Sorry.
No.
Well, isn't it all essentially goat couching with
I have
different
no
colors of
idea.
thread?
I mean, why this is the previous one, not this one, so the one
Oh.
before this one. I mean,
Oh.
because somebody asked, I mean, what's the technique of making it? Yeah, this one. Yeah, it's a. Anyway,
Okay.
Sorry.
Or with this batch, are these back to the other one, there's a tree with flowers. Are those the plum flowers? The previous batch? These plum flowers?
It's not plum.
I don't know, it's a very stylized flower.
There are
and-
5 petals. 5 petals. 5 petals usually represent plum.
That's a peony.
No,
No, not a peony.
no, it's not a peony.
Oh, that's a plum flower.
Plum
Yes,
flower.
plum flower.
The plum
Or-
flower
Or
used,
flowering apricot, that's sometimes they call them.
yes, used to be it symbolized the spring, early spring.
Well, actually, that's resolute in adversity, leadership.
Yeah, it means that this flower is the first one blooming after the winter. So it has a certain spirit. The plum flower used to be the national flower for a while.
Yeah, it's a December flower.
It's having certain spirit representing the
Yeah.
the
So
spirit.
either that or the narcissus, they're exchangeable
It's,
for a December flower.
it's plum flower.
Yeah. That's unusual though, when plum flower into a batch like this.
Yes, very unusual. We don't see these flower before. And we don't see a lot of lotus in Ming Dynasty. It looks like a Jiajing time of Qing Dynasty. It started to appear a lot of lotus flower. I wonder if the Imperial house is promoting the Buddhism religion a lot.
Not from Jiaqing. If you recall, the only symbols, and they occurred late in the Jiaqing period, were Taoist symbols. So if anything, he was pushing Taoism. He was not apparently not an ardent Buddhist.
There was one badge that you showed before. The whole edge of the badge is designed by Lotus Flower.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. But
I forgot which period was that.
no, that was Jiaqing, and it was toward the late part of the Jiaqing reign, and that was when the Taoist symbols appeared on the interior of the badge in the water. So the lotus is not only associated with Buddhism, but it's also associated with just purity and harmony. And so the lotus would not necessarily have a Buddhist connotation, particularly with only Taoist symbols in the interior of the badge.
Okay.
And Mr. Hugus. I just tried to Google the Chinese word in English. It seems to me it's in French. It's petit point, means small point. I don't know if that word exists for English because I speak French. I don't speak, my English is less. No, it doesn't matter. Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, sir. So we'll do the last badge. This is, in my estimation, an egret. We've got a crested head, a wedge-shaped tail, plain bird, no decorations. So I think that that's an egret. We have the Buddhist symbols that are relatively clunky, the use of the metallic thread in the bottom, and a more normal representation of the clouds above the water. I think that this is the not most aesthetically pleasing badge in the world, but there's no reason to question its authenticity. And that's the last badge that I have. And so I thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for your contributions in the discussion of the badges at the end of the presentation. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about rank badges. It's yours, Bob. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank David, and I think the last portion was really very interesting because we were actually able to get a discussion on different badges. I wish we had some other type of badges to look at, though. But I think it was very fruitful to have this type of talk. And I want to remind people that this program's been recorded, and I think it'll be a wonderful reference for anyone who is interested in the rank badges. I think we have an announcement that our next meeting, the April meeting, will be done by Su-Fong Chung, who is in our audience, and it's a program that I have been hoping she would do for about 3 years. It's been that long. Anyway, it's going to be a program on Chinese death and burial customs that early Chinese Americans had. And she said it's a program that we should only have for Qingming, which is Chinese Easter or Halloween. And I think that it's going to really be a great talk. Actually, we were thinking of having this program. I had heard Su-Fong give a talk at the Huntington on the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. And at that meeting, it was the first time that the Huntington had had an overflow crowd to their auditorium. And it was a well worth attending meeting. And I'm sure that the program that she's going to give us also is going to be well worth seeing. So please come. It's going to be a combination of meetings from the Historical Society and China Society. So it will be on the first Wednesday of October instead of our usual Monday. I think the other thing, maybe I can ask Felicia if she can unmute everybody and open up the program for video so everybody can see one another and say
everyone
hello.
can already unmute.
Oh, okay. Well, please unmute and please unmute and
and you could turn the video on
turn
too.
your video on so everybody can see one another. I know one of the problems we've had is that we haven't been able to have a live meeting, and I don't know when we will. We're not technologically able to have combine our usual dinner meeting with a Zoom meeting. So I think this will be the process that we will be having for the next couple of, for the near future. Anyway, does anybody else want to say hello?